Welcome back to DealBook. Mellody Hobson is here. She is one of the most senior black women in finance. She's the president and co-CEO of Ariel Investments, the first black-owned money management firm in the United States, which oversees $17.3 billion in assets. She's also the chair of Starbucks. And she's been with us before, and we're thrilled to have her back. And now we have Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She is also here with us in person today, and she is the co-founder of Archewell, an organization she started with her husband, Harry, Prince Harry, that includes their foundation and production studio, which is now ink deals with Spotify and Netflix. And we want to talk to them about how women can reach economic and professional parity, the role of women in business and society, and what has to happen next. And I want to thank both of you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Here's where I want to start the conversation, because I don't know if people know that you have been doing this, which is to say that you have been working the telephones, from what I understand, about the issue of paid family leave as part of this infrastructure package, talking to senators and congresspeople and all sorts of things. And the reason I bring it up is because you have made this issue and women a central one for you. And I'm sure there's people in the audience who are saying to themselves, you know what? I don't understand. She has this great privilege. How is this and why is this her topic? So I thought we'd start there.
Sure, let's start there. I mean, I think you mentioned privilege. My husband has always said, with great privilege comes great responsibility. But even before I had any sort of privilege in my life, when my life and my lifestyle were very, very different, I always just stood up for what was right. And so I had been gone from the US for a really long time. I lived in Canada for 7 years for work, then moved to the UK, and to come back and now be a mother of two, and to see that the US is one of only 6 countries in the entire world that doesn't offer any form of national paid leave, just didn't make sense. So I guess my approach was the same as it's been since I was really young. When I was 11 and I saw something that was wrong on TV, I put pen to paper and wrote a letter about it. So on this, I said, well, let me write a letter and let me pick up the phone and make some calls and see if I can help. It's just, to me, it seems like a really logical and obvious thing to do, and I'm happy that I'm able to support it. What happens when they pick up the phone and you say it's Meghan? Do you say it's Meghan, the Duchess? I introduce myself.
The whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, it's so funny because they're not planned calls, right? So I just get the phone number and I call and just have a conversation. Yes, people are pretty surprised, I think.
And the reaction, though, I mean, has it been positive?
I think this is one of those issues that is not red or blue. We can all agree that people need support, certainly when they've just had a child, and we have a 5-month-old baby, so it's a really sensitive one for us. We have the luxury of being able to have had that time, not just for moms, right, but for fathers as well, to be with our newborn. And I think if this entire country, if we valued American families in that way, as we should, it sets us up for economic growth and success, but it also just really allows people to have that very sacred time as a family.
I want to get to Mellody, but I have one other question. Do you have any anxiety about getting involved in politics?
I don't see this as a political issue, frankly. Look, there's certainly a precedent amongst my husband's family and the royal family of not having any involvement in politics, but I think this is, paid leave, from my standpoint, is just a humanitarian issue.
Mellody, I want to talk to you about something that you wrote earlier this year. And you said, why is it so hard for people to talk about money? And you talked about how when you were a child, you said, as a child, I was desperate to understand money, not to make it, but to master it.
Yes, I absolutely wrote that because I felt that this is one of these issues that is this idea of financial literacy, and our unwillingness to speak about money is causing us to actually widen the gaps that exist in our society. It fascinates me that you can overhear people in an elevator talking about what vaccine they got, but even the closest of friends won't sit together and speak about money issues. And I think that at the end of the day has dramatic repercussions for our society, particularly women and minorities in our society.
It's a really good point. To that, they did a study that said 61% of women would rather talk about the details of their own death than talk about money. And you look at that and go, how have we culturally allowed that to be the case? There's nothing wrong with talking about a woman's success or her ambition or her financial prowess. And we all know that if you're able to be financially independent, it changes how you move in the world. It changes your entire way of being.
You used the word ambition just now.
Oh, it's a trigger word.
Well, no, but it's a word that a lot of people have used to demonize women oftentimes.
Yes.
When the word ambition and women are put together, and you've been on the other end of that. Both of you have.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Mellody, we've talked about this before. It's a really interesting one. You think, why is it culturally we are equipping girls and women to think that if you are ambitious, there's something negative about that, whereas if a boy is described that way, or if a man certainly is described as ambitious, that's an incredibly positive thing culturally. But I don't know how we end up changing that. But I think, Mellody, would you agree? It's just a really troubling thing.
Also, I like definitions. The definition of ambition, in earnest pursuit of achievement. Earnest meaning serious. Why is that wrong? Why is pursuing achievement, whatever it might be, something that is negative? And why is it more negative for women than men? I think that's something that, again, our society has so many barriers that we have to overcome. But that is one where more symbols in society are very, very important. More symbols of achieving women ultimately will allow us to break down that barrier, that negative barrier that exists when it comes to ambition. I always joke with people, I meet people all the time and they tell me I'm so much nicer than they thought I would be, because it suggests that if you're ambitious, you can't be nice. You're going to be cutthroat. And again, that tells you a lot about our society and how we think of that pursuit of achievement.
Mellody, I got a question for you, which is, you're also a boss. You're like a big boss now. Do you think that you have to be different as a woman as a boss?
At times. So it's probably an answer that would surprise some people that I would say. I think that I have found myself having at times to modulate myself in order to win. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes I can be too big. And in being too big, someone can't hear me. So I have to figure out a way to connect with them so that they can hear me, not be intimidated, be non-threatening and not threatened at the same time. And finding that edge can be very, very hard, but it can mean thinking through how you show up and how people receive you.
How do you deal with that? Oftentimes you walk in here and it's like you're bigger than life just walking in.
Is that how you felt just now?
Yes.
No.
I mean, the whole place lit up. Absolutely.
That's why. Well, we don't get out much, so I don't personally feel that way. I still see myself as the same that I've always been, right? I've always been a hard worker. I have always, the people that know me well, and some of them are here today, I've just always been the same. And so I think Mellody's point is a really strong one in that the perception might be different, but if you are really grounded in who you are, in your ethics and your values, and I don't know, I show up in the same way that I always have.
How much do you think this whole issue of perception, and specifically for women, is a function of or being impacted and influenced by the media and the world of social media? I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people are grappling with now. Facebook came out recently, I wouldn't say they came out with it, but there was information leaked about sort of the impact that social media has on young women. But how does that, you think, impact the sort of larger issue?
The entire environment of social media, not just social media, media in a broader sense as well. I think there is really legitimate media, but at the moment you see, in many ways, social media feeding into that. So it becomes a race to the bottom because this clickbait culture has made it so that something that's salacious is more interesting and gets more pickup and can be monetized.
Right.
So that ends up being the thing that feeds the entire environment of the media. I think the challenging piece there is that in many ways, because it is so quick and rapid in how it's being delivered, it's about creating the news rather than reporting the news. But the damaging effects of that, specifically for women, especially for young girls, is impossible to even quantify.
Mellody.
But it can be harnessed for good. It can be harnessed in the other way. I've been watching the Muhammad Ali documentary by Ken Burns. That's a classic example of a look back at an individual who was extraordinarily controversial at the time, and just being able to see the totality of their impact on a society and understand the greatness that was there. No pun intended. He was the greatest in so many ways. And so the question is, how can we very, very carefully curate some of those messages, especially for young people, in a way that will lead them, again, to be ambitious and aspire for that same kind of greatness.
Well, and also to be...
Stories are powerful.
Well, but also to be able on those platforms to have some way where you are incentivized to promote things, as you're saying, Mellody, that are positive and good and true, right? But right now, if you're getting paid for the most clicks and you're getting more clicks when people are hate clicking on things, then without question, you are perpetuating a cycle, especially in the entire period of lockdown, right? In lockdown, let's say someone before that had, I don't know, 5 hours a week that they could invest in just scrolling online. During lockdown and the absence of being out of the house or being at work, maybe you're spending 50 hours online. And you're becoming indoctrinated. You're becoming conditioned to be cruel. And there has to be responsibility that lands somewhere, and that must be with the platforms, with some, that's a much larger conversation, but it's really
But do you think there's a way to harness social media in some way to actually help with these issues we're talking about now in terms of this issue of parity and some of the issues that you've been talking about, whether it be paid family leave or anything else?
I think that there are ways to make strong changes on social media platforms and with the media in general, but people have to be brave enough to do it. In terms of parity, I think, right now the demonization that you're talking about for women if they're being called ambitious, one of the things that seems like such an easy solve from my lens, and we talked to some friends about this as well, you look at Instagram, for example, there's a like button or there's comments. So you have to, if you disagree with it, comment in a really vitriolic way. As opposed to if there was just a dislike button, wouldn't that hugely shift what you were putting out there? Because you could just like it or dislike it. Now, you either like it or you have to say something negative. And it's just adding to this really unfortunate cycle that is, that I think is having a ripple effect on women across the board.
Mellody, I want to pivot the conversation to corporate America right now, because one of the things that's fascinating is we're starting to see the rise of employee activism and in many ways, actually the rise of pay parity and other programs at big business. And the question is whether this is a step change forever or this is a function of something else that may not last in an environment where the economy and the stock market are doing so well and investors are saying, go for it now, but what happens when things maybe aren't as good?
I think we've had plenty of examples in labor relations and U.S. history of step changes that actually became lasting. So you can look back to things like child labor. You can look at things of conditions in factories. I think that pay equity is one of those issues where we are seeing step changes based upon companies really committing themselves to measure. I always like to say math has no opinion. If you have the math, it'll tell you where you are. So I think some of the things that are happening right now are a direct reaction to the long economic expansion that we have been in this society, as well as the tight labor force that we have. We've seen this movie before. We saw that in the decades that followed World War II in terms of worker empowerment, but those changes didn't necessarily go away. So I think there's a language that is forming that is a common language. And I actually think because of the viral nature of our society, corporations and corporate leaders are being held accountable in a very different way than in times past.
But you think that the investor class, which you represent, long-term is going to say this is the way and we're willing to invest in this and possibly, by the way, make less profit in the short term as a function of it?
Well, I think what the Business Roundtable did when they said that the role of a corporation is more than just making profits, to look after all of their relevant stakeholders. Certainly that is the investor. That is also the person that works inside of that company, as well as the broader community. That was a bold moment when corporate America united in that point of view, because it is actually true. If you want to be a successful, world-class 21st century company in this country, you have to mind all of those constituents and make sure that you're creating an environment that where people want to come and work, where customers want to come and use your services or buy your product. And to the extent that it doesn't exist, over time, you will become less relevant. So I think at least the investor class from an Ariel Investments perspective, we think these things matter. These social ills of our society, the social issues of our society are at the feet of corporate America in a different way than they ever were before. And if you don't believe me, think about things like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we didn't have live shooter drills or mental health benefits. Corporate America realizes they have responsibilities that extend way beyond just pure profit.
But it's also a responsibility that benefits them, right? You don't have to do it for a tokenistic way. It will. I think there was something that said if there was parity within the workspace, it would add $12 trillion to the global economy. And you look at just the cultural stigma and just the systems that need changing. You know, it wasn't until the 70s in the US that women could access an independent line of credit. That was when my mom was growing up, right? The 70s is just a minute ago. And you look at that and think of how much progress we still need to make if women are making something like 84 cents on the dollar and black women are making 63 cents on the dollar. If we are able to keep pushing forward, and that comes and starts young, right? If I was ingrained at a young age to understand more about the stock market or have financial literacy, how different that would put me in the world. Because even though I grew up clipping coupons, and now that's ingrained in me as well. My values haven't changed.
Hold on. Are you still clipping coupons? Seriously?
Do they have coupons anymore? I don't know, but I will never buy anything online without finding an online promo code first. So that's still in there, right? It's a modern version of the same thing. But that's to say, if that was ingrained in me when I was young, imagine what the world would be like if you ingrained other elements of financial understanding, especially in young women, so they could move in the world in a different way.
You've talked about this idea of the dignity of work. And I'm curious what that's like for you and where you think that came from for you.
I don't know exactly where it came from. Both my parents have a very strong work ethic. And so I remember when I was really young, I must have been 8 or 9, I started making scrunchies to sell, and you might not remember scrunchies. Mellody, you'll remember scrunchies.
Of course, I know scrunchies.
But I would go downtown. I'd have my mom take me downtown to get like the scraps of fabric from the fabric store and sit there and knot them up and make them and sell them for, let's say if I sold 5, it was $5. Who knows? But I remember the feeling of knowing that I had done something. I had invested in myself, and I had done this labor and been compensated for it. And there was a sense of pride that comes from that, whether it's your first job waiting tables or hostessing, both things that I've done, and that couple $100, that gives you a sense of not just purpose, but a sense of self-satisfaction. And I think that for women, especially women who are at home raising kids, they're working. It's just unpaid labor, and they need to be recognized for their unpaid labor.
Okay, so I have a different question. How do we deal with men in all of this?
Well, they need to be part of the conversation.
Well, no, but beyond that, in terms of paid family leave,
yes,
in terms of changing the conversation and even dynamic among men around this?
I think it takes strong men and modern men, frankly, to really understand that they benefit from it as well. Paid parental leave is really important. It's not just about the mom being home. What it does and how it connects you as a family unit is really key. But equally, it incentivizes you to be able to go back to work. If you know that you can have that quality time and you're not sacrificing your job, or that you have to choose between your family and putting food on the table, the ripple effect of that is huge.
Right.
But men have to be a part of that.
But also, Andrew, facts matter. This is one of those things about perception and reality. So the reality is men benefit from a lot of these programs. That is just the truth. I remember looking at some statistics that really shocked me about work from home or work flexibility schedules pre-pandemic. 3/4 of the people who work from home are actually men. And I think most people don't realize that. Now, if they were a larger part of the workforce in general, that actually does make quite a bit of sense. But I think our natural inclination is that pre-pandemic, the person who needed the flexible work schedule was the woman. Well, she may, but the people who are actually using that flexible work schedule to their benefit right now are men, and that is not something that has hurt their career. In fact, more than half of men who had flexible work schedules said that they thought it helped their career. So if we know the facts, we can actually dispel myths and then recognize the opportunity is actually for everyone. It's not targeted at one gender or one group.
So Mellody, when the world goes back to work, and I think everybody is, I think it's starting, hopefully. I'm hoping. Do we think that Zoom culture is going to persist? And do we think it is a leveler, or do we think it is the opposite, that proximity to power still matters?
So first of all, I'm in my office right now in San Francisco, so I've been here. And in terms of a leveler or a problem. I actually think it could be both, and therefore we must be intentional. So I've told this to my team, and I say this to many people that I talk to. The one great thing about Zoom, you can invite more people into the conversation, particularly young people. You don't have to have a plane ticket for them to go and visit that client. They can sit and listen and learn in a way that perhaps they never had that access of, quote, being in the room where it happens before. At the same time, if you're not intentional about how you show up and you're making your presence known, you can actually lose out in a dramatic way. I tell people, you want to make sure you kill your career, ghost people in meetings. Just have that box with just your name. So at the end of the day, people forget you even work at the company. That is a surefire way to lose your standing or any opportunity for long-term success. So I think it's a two-part answer, and depending on how you leverage it or how management leverages it, it can be tremendous. I do not think it will go away. I think this hybrid world that we live in is likely to continue.
Yeah, I mean, look, we built our entire organization during COVID, so we wouldn't have been able to do it in the absence of Zoom or, other ways of just connecting, because it's a global business, right? We have team members who are in the UK, we have team members in other countries as well, but I do think it's really nice to be in person, right? And to be able to interact in that way. So I hope that the hybrid continues to work, but that people also recognize that even if you can do it remotely, that there's nothing that beats just real connection face to face. We wish you were here, Mellody.
We do.
I know, I say live is better than Memorex. We all prefer a live concert to a CD. There's a reason for that.
It's true.
But it's working, and I think it's leveled. I hope it's leveled.
Yeah, we find the balance.
We're finding the balance. I wanted to ask you both about being not just women, but women of color, and what you think is happening in this country right now, and also what has to happen that's different than just dealing with this issue singularly from a gender perspective. Well,
it's not a new issue, right? And I think even though there's been a lot more attention perhaps in the past year or two, what women and women of color have been experiencing for a very long time, I witnessed it through the lens of my mom and now as an adult myself, is still staggering. But I think that we're making strides in the right direction. And a lot of that comes down to, as we said, men being part of the conversation, but also women being able to support each other. The reason Mellody and I know each other is we have mutual friends who said, you have to know Mellody because she could be such a great mentor. And I think mentoring in that regard, what's so valuable isn't just cheerleading each other through the process of whatever discriminations we may face or whatever glass ceilings that are there, but really being the person to say, let me make this phone call for you. Actually, this is what you should be thinking about when you sign that contract. This is when you should walk away from the table. This is when you should push in a little bit more. Someone who has seasoned experience, who is able to guide you in a really strong way. That is part of how we're going to move the needle. I don't know if you agree, but that's been really valuable for me just in knowing Mellody.
Well, first of all, I've been thrilled to know you, and we've built a great relationship, and it's been fun to get to know you. I would say that when you think about this issue, this is the way I thought about it. It's going to be controversial what I say, but I do believe the number one beneficiary of diversity initiatives in this country have been white women. I think the problem is that there's this scenario that is created that it's a zero-sum game, and it is not. So diversity initiatives in this country have a gender bias. Unfortunately, that gender bias doesn't also necessarily include Black women. I don't see that as a victim. It's an observation. And I can give you chapter and verse and data about how that shows up in all sorts of statistics that companies publish, as well as diversity programs and things like that. I think for us to actually have a society that really works, we have to be much more comprehensive in how we think about this. And the way to do it is math, measure across all categories. So often when we talk about diversity, we have this multicultural umbrella where we put everyone together, women, minorities, it's all rolled up together, and it masks all the underrepresentation. I'll give you one simple example. We just passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill in this country. The US government has a mandate that with government spend, 5% must go to women and minorities. Now, here's the thing. Women represent 50% of the population, Black people 14.2%, 5%. goes to women and minorities. These are the kind of economic imbalances that exist that have to actually be addressed, and they need to be addressed in a more granular way.
One of the things that you've said, Mellody, is this idea that you don't believe necessarily in quotas, but you believe in targets. What do you mean by that?
Targets are very common in corporate America. We have earnings targets, we have profitability targets. There's a range. We know that if we give guidance in corporate America, we don't get it usually to the penny. We say we'll make between this and this. That is just normal, and we are incented against those targets. CEOs, you get what you incent. You incent them to grow earnings for the company or to hit that product launch, or salespeople get incented based upon the business and revenues that they drive. We need those same kind of targets around diversity. People are talking a lot about diversity, but you can't hit a goal unless you set one. I think those goals should be related to the overall demographics of our society. That's the best way to level set and have a plan. Otherwise, I think we're shooting in the dark. And then ultimately, I think those goals should be tied to incentives in order to drive the behavior that we'd like to see. Because so many companies tell us diversity is, quote, a strategic imperative. Every other strategic imperative, again, has these targets and has these incentives.
So how are you doing it? You're in the process of building a company.
Yes, we are indeed.
And is that part of the conversation? And how do you think about targets or goals or quotas or?
Well, we just try to lead by example, right? We're a small company, but we have the policies that we would like, right? So if I was an employee at our company, we have 20 weeks of paid leave, because if it's not being provided by the government at this point, and hopefully that'll change, you want to be a company that provides that for your employees. But in terms of, having a really multicultural staff, it's multicultural because we want a diversity, not just of people, but of opinions and points of view. It adds to the richness of the company and what we're able to deliver, be it on the production side or in our foundation side, anything that we do.
I asked Mellody the question, but I realized I didn't ask you. Being a boss.
Yes.
I've read great things about you as a boss, and if you read the tabloids, you can read all sorts of crazy things about it being a boss. Do you feel like you have to do it differently? And do you, specifically given your role, do you feel like you have to do it differently?
Well, firstly, I would urge you not to read tabloids, because I don't think that's healthy for anyone. Hopefully one day they come with a warning label like cigarettes do, like this is toxic for your mental health. I think that the way that I have now moved, as my husband and I have started to build this together on our own, we're just doing it the same way that we would want if we were employees of it, right? So to treat people the way you want to be treated. That is always how I've moved. I used to work on a TV series for 7 years. Right. That was a crew of over 200 people, right? So the way that you are when you're with a huge environment is no different than you are when you're with a small company. But it's been really interesting. Right. It's great to be in New York and be able to be with so many of our team in person.
Are you feeling, by the way, can I just ask you personally, are you feeling just better about everything? No, I'm serious. Because you just said the word mental health, and I think there was a moment where I think a lot of the world was asking the question.
Yes, I am feeling much better about everything. Thank you.
I do have to ask you one question, because it's in the news.
Tell me.
It's happening today.
What's happening?
There is the Daily Mail, as you know, in the UK, is appealing this ruling that was in your favor about this letter that they had published that you had sent to your father.
Correct.
And I just wanted to ask you, about the appeal and how you feel about it, and also just how you feel about these issues of privacy. You now live in the United States. The rules in the United States probably are no better, if in fact worse in some ways, relative to some of these issues.
Yeah, well, in terms of this, the appeal, I won the case, and this issue, frankly, has been going on when I had no children at all. Mellody, I now have 2 children, as you know, so it's an arduous process, but again, it's just me standing up for what's right, which I think is important across the board, be it in this case or in the other things we've been talking about today. At a certain point, no matter how difficult it is, if you know the difference between right and wrong, you must stand up for what's right, and that's what I'm doing.
Okay, before we let everybody go, Mellody, here's the question. You've been to DealBook now before. This is now your second time with us. If we do this together, all of us, in 10 years from now, a decade from now, that would be our 30th anniversary.
Oh, yes, happy anniversary, by the way.
Thank you. Are we still going to be having this conversation? What do you think, guys?
Sadly, yes, because the data shows, if I just do the math, the the rate of change will take a very, very, very long time. And we have to acknowledge that. We need some major, major milestones to be hit for this conversation to go away. And I just don't see how they occur at the current rate.
But that shouldn't I agree, but that shouldn't discourage us from trying to make those changes, right? So in 10 years' time, it might be a different version of the same conversation, but hopefully a different version in the right direction. And it's so important for women right now to really grasp the place that they have and the place that they should put themselves at the right tables, in the market, to not be afraid to know your worth and to not be able to know your financial worth. So hopefully if people start making those active steps on a day-to-day, then 10 years' time, conversation will still be had, but hopefully a lot better.
Well, I hope.
You also never know where a breakthrough will occur.
Sure.
I mean, Rosa Parks just decided not to stand up, and that changed a lot, and that everyone has power. People think that this is from on high. This is a team sport, the needle that we're trying to move.
That's such a good point.
I hope we're all on a journey. I hope we do have this conversation in 10 years, but it's a different one.
Yes.
If not before then. I want to thank both of you.
Thank you.
Mellody, thank you. And Meghan, thank you.
Thank you for having
Appreciate
us.
it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be back in just a little bit.